President Trump is opening up another dividing line within the conservative movement. His latest pick for Surgeon General, wellness influencer Dr. Casey Means, is reaping both praise and ridicule.
Trump had initially chosen Dr. Janet Neshwat for the role, but he seemingly switched gears at the last minute. The president took to Truth Social and wrote, "Casey has impeccable MAHA credentials and will work closely with our wonderful Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to ensure successful implementation of our agenda in order to reverse the chronic disease epidemic and ensure great health in the future for all Americans." Some on the right are not as enthusiastic. However, they've attacked her credentials and spiritual practices. Political commentator Richard Hanania called her a, quote, lunatic who will do serious damage to public health. He continued writing, "She'll be the first occupant of the office to believe in using spiritual mediums, praying to ancestor shrines, doing full moon ceremonies to amplify her dreams, asking the trees in the forest to deliver her a hunky man, being a shroom head, and praising indigenous wisdom."
Meanwhile, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote, "The attacks that Casey is unqualified because she left the medical system completely miss the point of what we are trying to accomplish with MAHA. Casey is the perfect choice for Surgeon General precisely because she left the traditional medical system, not in spite of it."
Podcaster David Pakman wrote on Blue Sky, "The new Surgeon General pick is Dr. Casey Means. She left clinical medicine, pushes biohacking to influencers, and hates public health standards. Quite the MAGA loyalty test."
This is really interesting to see the different sides of MAGA battling this out. You've had Laura Loomer being very against Dr. Casey Means, Richard Hanania, which we referenced in the opening, and then a lot of the MAHA adjacent people very excited about this pick. And I think there's good and bad here. The spiritual stuff, to me, the praying to trees, is very odd. But I appreciate her perspective on nutrition as a driving factor of the chronic illness epidemic, of helping with metabolism rates and things like that. So definitely a very mixed bag. I'm not sure she's 100% a quack, but there's definitely some concerning things in here as well.
Right. She doesn't have an active medical license. She didn't finish her residency. I also find it odd and something that should be a red flag here. On her website, actually, I looked and it said she's not able to comment on specific medical conditions or provide any medical guidance, and yet here she is going to be America's top doctor, which is typically a position we see high-ranking military, like they've served in a high-ranking military position. I know that Trump doesn't always go with the traditions here, and he bucks back at it, but when you look at that, you have someone on their website saying we don't give guidance, medical guidance, and the Surgeon General, what they're tasked with often doing is putting actually guidance on things like tobacco products. So they're actually giving us guidance to the American public on what not to do. So I find this, just ridiculous.
To be fair, I do think the Surgeon General's role is more in sharing guidance that's been developed by the agencies, right? They're not a lone wolf. They're not the Pope speaking ex cathedra. Sure. So I think that matters here. But getting into the broader debate over the MAHA movement and some of the pushback on the public health bureaucracy, I mean, I do think that this is something that has built a new coalition within the Republican Party and among conservatives because of what they saw as overreach during the COVID pandemic and of a lot of decisions made by people who had a lot of expertise or a lot of experience in the health industry who later admitted that that guidance wasn't really backed by science. Dr. Deborah Birx, for example, saying that the 6 feet social distancing rule was not really based on any real scientific guidance, but they just kind of had to pick a number so that it sounded good to people, or the 15 days to slow the spread, which was, again, another arbitrary choice. And there was a lot of misinformation around the effectiveness of masks, of the effectiveness of lockdowns, of the impact on vaccines and whether they could prevent you from getting or spreading the virus. And so all of this distrust in the public health bureaucracy has led us to this moment where I think the MAHA movement has allowed some people in who don't have the high-ranking credentials and maybe have a lot of alternative ideas that seem crazy on their face, but people are looking and saying, well, is it really that much more crazy than what we had to go through in 2020?
Sure, and there are people who think that way, right? I think there's others who say, well, if you're going to be America's top doctor, that's the title, doctor. you didn't finish residency, you don't have the credentials. And I think that often is a sticking point that many conservatives bring up is, well, you don't need to have those things. But people had those things prior to Trump. Being in office in Trump's camp and Trump's team, there was the belief that you had to have credentials, even if you believed in non-traditional medicine, which many Americans do, right? There are even aspects of it that I believe in. It doesn't mean that I want the one who is tasked with putting warning labels on tobacco products, on alcohol, to not have the credentials, to not have gone through and finished residency, to not have an active medical license. So I think that there's a balance to it, right? But what are we saying to future generations? You don't have to have anything to be America's top doctor. You don't have to have the credentials. So, there's always going to be those who say that and point to COVID as being, the lane of where we made many mistakes. And I'm not disputing that there were mistakes that were made by those who did have credentials, but that doesn't mean that it's a free ticket to then override everyone who does. And I think that's a foolish mistake to make. I think you have to look at it case by case versus looking at it as like a blanket statement, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I do think there's a difference between throwing someone in who has no medical experience whatsoever versus someone who did go to medical school, didn't leave the residency until very close to the end, and has talked about her reasons for doing so, where she felt like there was a complete rejection of nutrition as an important element in determining health outcomes. And then her medical license was active until January of 2024. So she was a practicing doctor for some time and actually guiding patients. So I don't think it's quite as black and white as, well, she doesn't have the credentials.
I'll concede on some of that.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, coming up, New York Attorney General Letitia James in trouble with the FBI. That story up next. Stay with us here on The Rising.